Hello and welcome to Radio Podcast.
Great to be here.
Today we're taking a deep dive into, well, a place everyone's heard of, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. You know, The Rock.
That's right. An iconic name and an iconic place.
Absolutely. We've dug into a lot of sources to really explore its history, that notorious reputation it had, what life was actually like inside.
And some of those famous or maybe infamous stories surrounding it.
Exactly. So if you're looking to get a really sharp, insightful understanding, maybe pick up some surprising details without getting totally bogged down, you've definitely come to the right place.
It really is amazing how Alcatraz still captures the imagination, isn't it? Even all these years after it shut down as a prison.
It really does.
And tracing its history is fascinating. It wasn't always this supermax-style prison we picture. It started as a military fort way back in the 1850s.
Okay, a fort first.
Yeah, and the main building, the cell house itself, that was originally built between 1910 and 1912. But as a U.S. Army military prison?
Ah, okay. So not initially for guys like Capone. That's an important point.
Precisely. The Department of Justice only took it over in 1933. Then, in 1934, the Bureau of Prisons came in and did a major overhaul, modernized it, really ramped up the security.
And the whole idea was escape-proof, right? Because of the location.
That was the core belief. You've got this island, 1.25 miles out in San Francisco Bay, freezing water, strong currents. People even talked about sharks, though maybe that was played up a bit.
Yeah, you hear the shark stories.
Yeah.
But the water itself was dangerous enough, I imagine.
Absolutely. They truly thought no one could make it across.
And that original Army prison construction back in 1910, was that a big deal at the time? I saw a figure, $250,000.
Oh, yeah. That was a very significant sum back then, a huge investment. And interestingly, when that concrete building was finished, word was it was the longest concrete building in the world.
Really? Wow.
And they were quite resourceful, too. They actually reused materials from the old fort citadel that was there before. Iron staircases, a cell house door, even some big granite blocks.
So history literally built into the walls. It sounds like even in its Army days, it was meant for troublesome folks.
It was, yes. But when it became a federal prison, Alcatraz was specifically designated as the last resort prison.
Last resort, meaning?
Meaning it was for inmates who caused major problems at other federal prisons, guys they thought were basically beyond rehabilitation, no hope.
Right. So they weren't sending first-timers there.
Definitely not. The very first group, 137 prisoners, arrived on August 11th, 1934. They came from Leavenworth, Kansas.
And these were the big names.
A lot of them, yes. Notorious bank robbers, counterfeiters, murderers, people well known at the time. You can kind of picture the scene, can't you? This imposing place receiving this collection of high-profile criminals.
Yeah, definitely sets a scene. I also read something about early problems with the tech.
Ah, yes, the metal detectors. State-of-the-art for the time, these electromagnetic ones, but they kept overheating, malfunctioning.
Oh, not ideal for security.
Not at all. They often had to just turn them off. Eventually, they canceled the contract with the company that installed them.
And nature threw some curveballs, too. A landslide.
That's right. A big storm in 1935 caused a landslide. It actually damaged one of the workshop buildings, the Model Industries building. They had to do some major structural work after that. So even the rock wasn't completely indestructible.
It seems like they kept pouring money into it, though, upgrades and things.
They did. There was a major redevelopment costing over $1 million between 1939 and 41.
What did that involve?
Building the new industries, completely overhauling the powerhouse, putting up a new water tower for better water storage.
And I heard something fascinating about World War II, the workshops.
Yes. That's a great detail. During the war, the prison workshops were actually really productive. Inmates were making army uniforms, cargo nets, things like that.
Wow. These infamous criminals contributing to the war effort. That's unexpected.
It really is. A strange kind of irony, maybe.
But Alcatraz, as a federal prison, it didn't last that long, did it? In the grand scheme of things.
No, not really. It officially closed its doors on March 21st, 1963.
Why then? What were the main reasons?
Well, it was a few things coming together. It was always incredibly expensive to run compared to other prisons.
We'll get into those costs, I bet.
Definitely. Plus, the building's really deteriorating. All that salt spray from the bay just eats away at concrete and metal. Repairs were getting prohibitively expensive.
The escape. The big one.
And yes, the June 1962 escape attempt, that certainly brought a lot of negative attention and scrutiny. It was kind of the final nail in the coffin.
We absolutely have to talk about the escapes later. But it's quite something, isn't it? This feared prison is now this huge tourist destination.
It's a massive transformation. And I even saw a recent mention President Trump proposed maybe reopening it back in May 2025.
Reopening it as a prison, that seems
Wow.
logistically huge.
Immense challenges, yes. Logistical, financial. For now, its legacy is definitely as a museum. I think something like 1.5 million people visit every year. Everyone wants to see inside those walls.
So we've got the physical place, how it changed over time. But the real power of Alcatraz comes from its reputation, doesn't it? The fear factor.
Absolutely. Right from the start, as a federal prison, Alcatraz cultivated this image, the toughest, the most fearsome prison in America, maybe the world at that time.
And the stories match the image. Brutality, inhumane conditions.
There were definitely reports like that from former prisoners, very restrictive conditions, pushing people to their absolute limits psychologically. The first suicide happened pretty early on.
Grim.
And there were some disturbing cases of self-mutilation, too. It paints a pretty bleak picture of the desperation inside.
I saw it called the Great Garbage Can of San Francisco Bay. That's harsh.
A very stark description. And it wasn't just inmate talk. Even high-level officials had concerns. Well, back in 1939, the U.S. Attorney General, Frank Murphy, publicly criticized it, said it created a sort of sinister, dehumanizing environment.
And then you had more famous criminals arriving, like Robert Stroud, the Birdman. That must have added to the mystique.
It absolutely did. Though it's funny you mentioned the Birdman.
Yeah. What about him? I heard he didn't actually have birds there.
That's the irony. The name stuck from his time at Leavenworth, where he did all his bird research. At Alcatraz, he wasn't allowed birds. He spent almost all his time there in solitary confinement, actually.
Wow. Okay, so the popular image is a bit off there?
Very much so.
Yeah.
But here's a paradox. Despite the fearsome reputation, some prisoners actually said the living conditions, especially the food, were better than other prisons they'd been in.
Really? Better food at Alcatraz. That's the last thing I'd expect.
Strange, isn't it? There are accounts of inmates even volunteering to transfer there, maybe for the structure, maybe just for the, notoriety.
That is genuinely surprising. You'd think everyone would want out, or to avoid it completely. So the reality was maybe a bit more complex than just the legend.
It often is. But there were definitely dark events, too. There was that murder in 1940, an inmate named Rufus McCain, killed by Henry Young.
Right, I read about that. Didn't Young's trial bring up the harsh conditions?
It did. His defense basically argued he wasn't fully responsible because of the cruel and unusual punishment he'd suffered from guards. He was convicted of manslaughter, not murder, but the trial definitely put a spotlight on the alleged brutality inside.
So things maybe got a little less harsh later on. In the 50s?
Gradually, yes.
Wow.
Conditions did seem to improve somewhat. More privileges were introduced, like letting inmates play musical instruments sometimes.
Music in Alcatraz.
Yeah, and they started showing movies occasionally in the dining hall. Even the strict rule about silence was relaxed a bit.
But it was still Alcatraz, still the end of the line.
Oh, absolutely. And it remained incredibly expensive to run. That cost factor was huge.
What were the numbers again?
Yeah. By 1959, it was costing about $10 per prisoner per day. Compare that to maybe $3 per day at other federal prisons.
Wow, more than triple the cost. That's unsustainable.
Exactly. And add that to the constant repairs needed because of the salt air damage.
Right, the crumbling structure.
By 1961, engineers were basically saying the buildings were seriously compromised, the repairs needed were just too expensive.
And then the 1962 escape kind of sealed the deal.
It really did. It triggered investigations, intense scrutiny, and ultimately the decision was made. Shut it down.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of daily life. What was it actually like inside those cells? We know they were tiny, 9 by 5 by 7 feet.
Incredibly small and very basic. You had a bed, a small desk, a wash basin, and a toilet right there on the back wall.
Privacy. Non-existent, I assume.
Pretty much. There was a small air vent going into a utility corridor. No hot water in the cells until right near the very end, early 60s.
And the toilets. Salt water.
Saltwater flush, yes. Which probably, contributed to a pretty constant, unpleasant smell throughout the cell house.
Not a pleasant thought. And the rules. I hear they were incredibly strict, covering everything.
Oh, absolutely. When you arrived, you got this little booklet. Rules and regulations, daily routine, all laid out.
What were the basics they were guaranteed?
Just the essentials.
Yeah.
Food, clothing, shelter, medical care, anything else. That was a privilege. Something you had to earn and something they could take away instantly.
Like what sort of privileges?
Things like work assignments, Access to the library, eventually maybe playing music, but there were rules for everything. Hygiene, how often you had to shave, how tidy your cell had to be.
And contraband was a huge deal.
Massive. Trying to bribe a guard, assault an officer. Those were major offenses, obviously. And something important to note, reflecting the times, African-American inmates were kept segregated from the white prisoners.
Right, segregation even within those walls. It's the small details, too, like how they issued toilet paper or soap. It makes it very real.
It does, very regimented. And that infamous code of silence.
How strict was that really? Was it constant silence?
Initially, it was enforced very rigorously. Imagine the isolation. It did get relaxed a bit in the 1950s, allowing for quiet talk in the cell house and dining hall, but shouting, loud noise, still strictly forbidden.
And the daily schedule? Predictable, I imagine.
Extremely. Wake-up call in the morning, breakfast, work shifts if you had one, lunch, short rest, more work, dinner, then lock-in for the night. Lights out sharp at 9:30 p.m.
Sounds grinding. No wonder some prisoners called it hell.
You can absolutely see why. It was designed to be monotonous and oppressive.
But you mentioned the library. That sounds like it could have been a lifeline.
For many, it really was. It was located at the end of D Block, and surprisingly, it held quite a few books, 10, maybe 15,000. A lot were left over from the Army days.
How did inmates get books?
They had a system. You could fill out a request slip, and a librarian orderly would bring the books to your cell.
Were there limits? Censorship?
Oh, yes. Limits on how many books you could have at once. And definitely censorship. Anything considered too heavy on sex, crime, or violence was out. Newspapers were banned entirely.
But magazines were okay.
You could subscribe, yes, but they'd often arrive with articles or pictures literally cut out by the censors.
Despite all that, reading was popular.
Very. It wasn't unusual for guys to read 75, even 100 books a year. It was a crucial mental escape, you know.
I can only imagine. And music, too, you said. Instruments.
Yes, generally allowed for about an hour each evening in their cells. Guitar, accordion were common.
Was there a band?
There was a prison band that sometimes practiced in the dining hall. And famously, Al Capone supposedly played the banjo.
A cone playing banjo. Where?
In the shower block, believe it or not. That's the story. Anyway, it's a very strange image.
It really is.
Yeah.
Scarface, the banjo player. Okay, what about the cell house layout? Those street names for the corridors. Broadway, Michigan Avenue.
Yeah, kind of ironic, wasn't it? A little reminder of the outside world they couldn't reach. Broadway was the main central corridor. Always busy, least private place.
And D Block. That had a worse reputation. Because of the hole.
Exactly. D Block housed the segregation cells, the really tough cases. And yes, the hole. That was solitary confinement.
Cells 9 to 14 in D Block, right?
Yeah.
What were conditions like in there? I read some pretty awful stuff.
Exceptionally harsh. Minimal light, often total darkness. Very limited time out for showers or exercise, maybe an hour a week, if that.
And the worst part was the strip cell.
The strip cell was the ultimate punishment within the hole. Basically, a dark, empty concrete room, nothing inside but a hole in the floor for a toilet. Inmates were often kept there naked with minimal.
That sounds like torture. Henry Young talked about this.
His testimony during his trial was harrowing. Described being stripped, left in the cold, dark, stinking cell, meager rations. It's hard to even fathom the psychological impact.
Just chilling to think about. Even meals, something so basic, had this whole rigid process.
Oh, totally regimented. They had this whistle system. 1 whistle for this block to stand, 2 whistles to move, etc. Precise seating. Hands had to be in a certain place. When to start eating, all dictated.
Silence during meals, too, at first.
Yes, initially very strict silence. And you only had about 20 minutes to eat. Wasting food. That could cost you privileges.
Did the guards eat with them?
Often, yes. Guards and prison officials would eat in the same dining hall, at separate tables usually, but alongside the inmates.
And the food itself? You said surprisingly good.
That's the consistent report, surprisingly. Compared to other prisons at the time, Alcatraz food was considered high quality. Another one of those weird contradictions.
Definitely. What about any kind of break? Recreation?
Limited access to the recreation yard, mostly on weekends and holidays.
What could they do out there?
Games, mostly. Baseball, softball were popular. Chess, too. The yard wasn't huge, so they actually padded the wall behind first base because guys would run into it.
Padded walls in the prison yard. Okay. Did they have teams?
Yeah, inmates formed their own baseball teams, gave them names from minor and major league clubs. It was a big deal.
And a chance to actually talk.
Exactly. Those weekend hours in the yard were probably the main time for real conversation, social interaction, a vital outlet.
Okay, we absolutely have to talk escapes now. This escape-proof place. People definitely tried, right?
Oh, constantly. The guards basically assumed escape was always on someone's mind. Officially, though, the line was always, no one successfully escaped Alcatraz.
But there were attempts. Many.
14 documented attempts involving 36 different prisoners. 2 guys even tried twice.
And the outcomes?
Most were caught, 23 of them. 6 were shot and killed during their attempts. 2 definitely drowned. And then there are 5 listed as missing and presumed drowned.
The mystery ones. We'll get to them. What about the very first attempt?
That was Joseph Bowers in 1936. Tried to climb a fence, ignored warnings, and was shot by a guard in a tower. Died from his injuries.
Tragic start. And then the first disappearance. Cole and Rowe in 37.
Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe vanished during a really bad storm. The official conclusion was they were swept out to sea by the currents and drowned. No bodies ever found.
But the really famous ones. The Battle of Alcatraz and the 1962 escape.
Those are the 2 biggest for sure. The Battle of Alcatraz in 1946 was incredibly violent.
What happened there?
6 inmates managed to overpower some guards, got into the weapons cache.
They got guns inside Alcatraz.
Yes. Their plan was to get to the boat dock, but they couldn't get the main cell house door open. It turned into a siege. Hostages were taken, guards were killed.
How did it end?
They actually had to call in the U.S. Marines. It was intense fighting. 3 of the prisoners were killed in the battle.
And the fighters.
They were put on trial. 2, Shockley and Thompson, were later executed for their roles. Clarence Carnes got another life sentence, a really bloody, desperate affair.
It just shows the lengths people would go to. And then 1962, big one, Escape from Alcatraz. The movie, the legend.
Frank Morris and the brothers John and Clarence Anglin. An incredibly detailed plan.
How did they get out of their cells? That seems impossible.
Well, the concrete around the air vents in their cells back in B Block was apparently quite damaged by the salt air. Softened.
So they chipped away at it.
Over weeks, maybe months. Using improvised tools, spoons, maybe a drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor. They were incredibly resourceful.
How did they hide the noise? And the holes?
They apparently did a lot of the noisy work during the prison's music hour when there was more ambient sound. And they made false walls, painted cardboard to cover the holes during the day.
And the dummy heads. Those are
It
famous.
was amazing, weren't they? Made from soap, plaster, toilet paper, paint, even real human hair from the barbershop. Put them in their beds so guards doing night counts would think they were asleep.
Unbelievable ingenuity. So they got out of the cells. Then what?
Climbed up through the utility corridors, got into the ventilation system, and made it out onto the roof through a fan vent they'd managed to disable.
And then off the island.
How? They'd constructed this inflatable raft, stitched and glued together more than 50 stolen raincoats. They also made crude life vests.
A homemade raft for the bay. That's risky.
Extremely. They launched it from the northeast shore of the island and paddled off into the night.
Was anyone else involved?
There was a 4th man, Alan West. He helped with the planning and digging, but couldn't get his vent cover off in time that night, so he got left behind. He ended up providing a lot of details to the FBI later.
So what happened to Morris and the Anglins? Did they make it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The official FBI report concluded they most likely drowned. The water was incredibly cold, the currents treacherous, especially on a homemade raft.
But no bodies were ever found. That's key.
Never definitively identified, which is why the mystery persists. The U.S. Marshal Service technically still has the case open, warrants out for their arrest.
Are there clues they might have survived?
Over the years, bits and pieces have surfaced. Some debris, a paddle, parts of the raft were found on Angel Island nearby, a wallet with names and photos. There was a report of a car theft on the mainland that night.
And the Brazil connection, that photo.
Yeah, years later, a photo surfaced, allegedly showing the Anglin brothers living in Brazil in the 1970s. Forensics on it are debated, but it keeps the possibility alive for some. It's just one of those enduring mysteries. Did they pull off the impossible?
It really fires the imagination. That desire for freedom against all odds.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. What about the people running the place? The administration, the guards?
Well, the initial staff was around 155 people, and their main job, really the only job, was security. Rehabilitation wasn't the focus at Alcatraz.
What was it like for them living on the island?
They had their own housing, separate from the prison. Families lived there too. It was its own little community, but obviously overshadowed by the prison itself. Guard salaries weren't particularly high, considering the job.
And the main admin building, that was the nerve center.
Right at the entrance, yeah. Warden's office, communication gear, control room, eventually added in '61, armory, visiting area, all the key functions.
Was there a hospital on site? Yes, above the dining hall. Staffed by U.S. Public Health Service employees. But apparently they had a hard time keeping doctors there long term. High turnover. Dealing with that inmate population was tough.
I bet. Did any famous inmates spend time in the hospital?
Stroud, the Birdman, spent a lot of time there later in his sentence. Al Capone was treated there for syphilis complications before being transferred off the island.
Insecurity. Obviously top priority. What measures did they have? Guard towers?
Bar towers, yeah. The cell fronts were made of tool-proof steel, special locking devices, iron grills everywhere, those metal detectors we mentioned when they worked, tear gas canisters built into the dining hall ceiling just in case, gun galleries overlooking the cell blocks in the yard.
Gun galleries. So guards were up above with guns.
Yes, catwalks enclosed in mesh where guards could patrol with rifles, overseeing everything below. They took absolutely no chances. Warden Johnston, the first warden, worked closely with the Attorney General and the head of the Bureau of Prisons, Sanford Bates, to deliberately create this image of an inescapable, legendary prison. They even nicknamed it Uncle Sam's Devil's Island.
So the reputation was actively cultivated. Courts couldn't just sentence someone directly to Alcatraz, right?
No, that's a common misconception. You had to be transferred from another federal prison, usually because you were deemed too difficult or an escape risk elsewhere. They did intense research on every potential incoming prisoner.
Constant vigilance, it sounds like. Head counts.
13 official prisoner counts every single day.
Wow.
Constant checks of bars, locks, windows. Alcatraz actually had the lowest prisoner-to-guard ratio of any American prison at the time. About 1 guard for every 3 prisoners, sometimes even better.
Wow, that's intensive staffing.
Yeah.
Patrolling Broadway, counting spoons after meals.
Every utensil had to be accounted for after every meal. Nothing could go missing that might be turned into a weapon or a tool. Security permeated every single aspect of life there.
And the warden's house. That must have been quite a contrast to the cells.
Oh, absolutely. A big 15-room mansion. Sources differ slightly on the exact size, but it was large. Overlooking the bay, the 4 wardens who served at Alcatraz lived there with their families. They apparently hosted some pretty lavish parties there sometimes.
Strange to think of parties happening right next to that grim prison. What happened to the house?
It actually burned down during the Native American occupation of Alcatraz in 1970 after the prison closed.
And there were other buildings, too, for staff.
Yes. Building 64 was the first big building on the island, originally for military officers and their families. And the social hall, or officers' club,
What was that like?
it was the social hub for staff and families, had a bar, library, dance floor, even a bowling alley, a bit of normalcy for them. That also burned down in 1970.
And the functional buildings. Power, water.
The powerhouse provided electricity from 39 to 63. There was a guard tower on it, too. And the water tower, built in the early 40s, was the tallest structure. Crucial, since all fresh water had to be barged over from the mainland.
And the workshops. Model industries, new industries.
Right. Model Industries was originally the laundry, then workshops, damaged in that 35 landslide. The new Industries building, built in 39, housed the clothing factory, laundry, furniture plant, brush factory, places where inmates with privileges could work for a very small wage.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's quickly recap some of those really notable inmates. We mentioned Capone and Stroud.
Right. Capone got no special treatment, worked menial jobs like in the laundry, apparently got into some fights, transferred out due to his health. Stroud, the Birdman, mostly in solitary and D-block, wrote books on bird diseases, but yeah, no birds allowed.
Who else stands out? Machine Gun Kelly.
George Machine Gun Kelly Barnes apparently boasted about crimes he didn't even commit, but Warden Johnston reportedly considered him a model inmate. Quiet, worked steadily.
And the longest-serving inmate.
That would be Alvin Creepy Karpus Karpovich. He was labeled public enemy #1 at one point. J. Edgar Hoover took his capture personally. Karpus spent 26 years inside Alcatraz. Longer than anyone else.
Wow, 26 years on the rock. Just a slice of the notorious figures who passed through.
Huh?
And finally, Alcatraz has its legends, doesn't it? Ghost stories.
It does. Going way back, local Native American tribes, the Ohlone and Miwok, believed the island was a place of evil spirits, best avoided.
And today, Haunted Alcatraz.
It's frequently listed as one of the most supposedly haunted places in California, even the country. People report strange noises, cold spots, feelings of being watched, especially in the cell house at night. Adds another layer to the mystique.
So, to kind of pull this all together, Alcatraz starts as a fort, becomes this ultimate federal prison designed to be inescapable, built this fearsome reputation.
Defined by harsh conditions, strict routines, but also surprising details like decent food.
Be the stage for these incredible escape attempts, especially the 62 one that still grabs us.
And finally closed due to cost and decay, only to be reborn as this massively popular museum preserving all that complex, dark history. We've definitely hit on some surprising angles today.
It really have. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? That final thought for you, the listener. Consider the sheer psychological weight of that place. On the inmates, absolutely, but also on the guards, the staff, living and working in that intense, isolated environment every day.
Yeah, what did that do to everyone involved? And maybe the bigger question is, why are we still so fascinated by Alcatraz, this place that was meant to be the end of the line, the place nobody could leave? Why does it still hold such a powerful grip on our imagination, even now?
Really makes you think. There's so much more to explore if you're interested in the stories and history of Alcatraz. Definitely worth digging into further. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive today.